Chair recognizes Mr. Day of Stoneham. Members are asked again to please take their seats and subdue their conversations and pay due attention to the gentleman at the microphone. Mr. Day of Stoneham.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and through you to the members, that's not a hard act to follow, so I thank you as well. Mr. Speaker, I rise today in support of this bill, and as I do so, I would first like to take a moment of personal privilege for a few brief moments as I deliver my maiden speech here. I am truly humbled to be a member of this chamber, and I must thank a few members here and groups in my first address to this great and general court. I have the great honor of being sent here to represent the Fighting 31st Middlesex District, which comprises the great towns of Stoneham and Winchester. And I thank my constituents for placing their trust in me. I work every day to honor those votes and to represent their voices here in the State House. Thank you for sending me here. Thank you also to my assistant, Patricia Leslie, without whom, as you all know in this chamber, very simply I would not be able to serve in this role. I want to express my sincere gratitude to you, Mr. Speaker, and to your staff and entire leadership team, from the Majority Leader to Madam Speaker Pro Tem to your floor leaders and chairpersons. I've heard stories about freshmen in the past, under different leadership, not even being allowed to approach the rostrum. I've got to say that I've never waited long when I've asked for the opportunity to either meet with you in person, to advocate for my position on any legislation. I don't know if taking that opportunity to speak with you has helped me or hurt me, but I certainly appreciate that opportunity, and also the example you've set with your leadership and the respect with which you treat all members in this House. It permeates the entire chamber and is a model for how we legislators should conduct ourselves. Thank you. Of course, respect accorded does not always translate into respect received. We see examples in Washington all the time of individuals putting themselves before the greater good and allowing the theater of politics to frustrate the purpose of governing. So thank you to the Minority Leader and to his team for also setting example to the members by rejecting those traits and for recognizing the difference between policy disagreements and personal agendas. Last but not least, I would not be standing here today without the love and support of the love of my life, my beautiful wife, Megan, and the other three lights of my life, my sons, Connor, Ryan, and Finnegan, who are here with me today on the balcony. I also want to recognize and thank my parents, Joseph and Mary Day, who have joined my brood up there as well. Thank you all. Mr. Speaker, my parents instilled in me the values that bring me to this podium today. They're two Irish Catholic kids who grew up together in Woburn, who've been married for 54 years come November, who attend Mass together every Sunday, who have had 7 children together, who both work tremendous hours to offer each one of their children the opportunity to have first-class educations, to become the men and women we are today, and to see the world and all of its problems and successes, and to value and appreciate all of the magnificent differences in it. As did so many of your own parents, my parents did everything in their power to ensure that the world was a better place for their children. And it is in that tradition that I rise today, to make the world my children are entering a better, more accepting, and more compassionate place for them and others. To reaffirm to them that our neighbors and classmates and cousins, no matter their race, no matter their gender, no matter their religion or sexual orientation or age, all have a right to be treated equally, with dignity and respect, to not be discriminated against because of their differences, for it is those very differences that make our country and Commonwealth so great. The legislation before us today will remove a loophole in our general laws that currently does not provide explicit protections from discrimination to our transgendered brothers and sisters in public accommodations. It will affirm that this group ought to be and will be free from discrimination, not just in the workplace and in housing and in credit, as this body affirmed in 2011, but also in hotels, schools, restaurants, hospitals, and yes, bathrooms. As a member of the Judiciary Committee and here today, I've listened to all sides of the debate on this issue. I've engaged in that debate with many members of the chamber, and I've heard from many of my constituents. Most of that debate has been civil and constructive. I've enjoyed and learned from the debates I've had with my friend from Andover on this issue, even though he and I could not disagree more. I listened closely to those testifying before the committee, and I recall vividly one woman offering her testimony after identifying herself as a civil rights attorney. She stated that it is our job as legislators to protect the rights of women and children. I was moved to remind her at the conclusion of her testimony that it is our job as legislators not just to protect the rights of women and children, but to protect the rights of all of our citizens, including those in our transgendered community. The line of argument that this woman and some others have offered, that this legislation would somehow put women and children in danger or would somehow lessen individual privacy rights, intentionally blurs the line between a transgender individual and a sexual predator. In so doing, this argument further stigmatizes, demonizes, and isolates our transgender population, a population that is struggling with an attempted suicide rate of 41%. 41%. Are we in this great body to do nothing in the face of this? Let us be clear today. A transgender individual is not a sexual predator. A transgender individual, quite simply, is a person whose sense of self does not correspond with their birth gender. That's it. A transgender individual is your son, your daughter, your classmate, your friend, or your friend's child. A transgender individual is your constituent, and someone who ought to have the freedom to live his or her life without fear of having to face discrimination simply because of who they are. To those who fear that this legislation will plunge private business into uncertainty and open them up to needless litigation, I say that not only have more than 250 businesses in many chambers of commerce announced their support of this bill, but that the changes made in the House version of this legislation will provide regulatory certainty for these businesses from the MCAD and will lift a veil of discrimination that some businesses do indeed hide behind. To those who fear that this legislation will allow a true sexual predator to attempt to claim protections for criminal acts, I say not only have lead law enforcement associations in the Commonwealth announced their overwhelming support of this bill, but that the changes made in the House version will provide clear guidance to our law enforcement agencies and strengthen protections for our transgendered constituents. To those who say we are taking privacy rights away from the many for the benefit of the few, I say that nothing in this legislation takes away any expectation or right to privacy that we currently have, whether that is in the restroom, the locker room, or the waiting room. This bill does not give anybody the right to invade your personal privacy anywhere, and the same laws that currently protect you in the bathroom will continue to protect you in the bathroom. Finally, I've heard from many of my colleagues that we don't need to take this up now, that the MCAD should be able to address this and many of these cases with the right case in the future, that discrimination against transgendered individuals will not even be an issue in the near future, that it will go the way of arguments against gays in the military or marriage equality. To that argument, I point to the recent law passed in North Carolina as a cautionary tale, and to the positions still held by some in our communities that marriage equality should be put on the ballot as reason enough to pass this law today. Finally, I look to the words of John Gardner, the former Secretary of Health, Education, and Welfare under President Johnson, who said, "Some citizens are so good that nothing a leader can do will make them better. Others are so incorrigible that nothing can be done to improve them. But the great bulk of the people go with the moral tide of the moment. The leader must help create that tide." Mr. Speaker, I hope my colleagues will join me in voting in favor of this legislation overwhelmingly, that Massachusetts will once again lead this country in affirming that civil rights belong to all of our citizens, and that discrimination will have no role in the future that we leave to our children. Thank you.